On a cold winter evening, Keanu Reeves found himself caught in an utterly unexpected situation. A homeless boy, his eyes wide with panic, screamed to stop him from doing something that could have led to unimaginable consequences. What unfolded next was the beginning of a chain of extraordinary events, revealing dark secrets and changing both their lives forever. What could have made a poor boy the center of such mysterious forces? Before diving into the story, let us know where you're watching from. Share your city or country in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow, another inspiring story awaits you. The story begins on December 15th, 2017, a Friday. The streets of Manhattan buzzed with the sounds of tourists, honking taxi horns, and hurried footsteps on snow-dusted sidewalks. In the distance, the Christmas tree at Rockefeller Center sparkled, its glow radiating festive warmth amidst the bitter cold. Amid the bustling crowd, Keanu Reeves walked quietly, dressed simply in a modest coat, scarf, and well-worn shoes that reflected his humble nature. To most people, he was just another face in the sea of holiday shoppers, and that was exactly how he liked it. Keanu had just purchased a hot dog from a street vendor when a voice pierced through the noise. High-pitched, urgent, and filled with fear. "Don't eat that!" The sudden, frantic cry froze Keanu in place, the hot dog halfway to his lips. Turning around, he saw a boy, no older than 9, his face smudged with dirt, wearing an oversized hoodie that hung loosely over his small frame. The boy's trembling hands clutched the fabric tightly, his wide eyes locked on Keanu with a mix of terror and desperation. Startled, Keanu lowered the hot dog and asked, his deep voice calm but concerned, "What's going on?" The boy hesitated, biting his lip before blurting out, "It's poisoned." A strange silence seemed to blanket the bustling street. Passers-by slowed down, their curiosity piqued as the boy's words cut through the icy air. "Poisoned?" Keanu repeated, his brow furrowing. "How do you know that?" The boy's shoulders slumped, his gaze darting nervously toward the street vendor. "I just know, okay? Please don't eat it, sir." His voice cracked, carrying something raw, an unfiltered vulnerability that stirred something deep within Keanu. He felt an overwhelming urge to act. "Hey, it's okay," Keanu said, crouching to meet the boy's eyes. "We'll figure this out together." "What's your name?" "Ethan," the boy whispered. "I'm not lying, I swear." Keanu nodded, his eyes sweeping over the crowd that had begun to gather. People murmured, some pulling out their phones to record the bizarre scene. The vendor, visibly flustered, began to sweat, his voice stammering. "I don't know what this kid's talking about. My food's clean." Keanu straightened, his calm demeanor unwavering. "It's all right. Let's not jump to conclusions." He handed the hot dog back to the vendor, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a $100 bill. "Get yourself something warm to eat, Ethan. You look like you need it." But Ethan shook his head vehemently. "I don't want your money. I just want you to believe me." His eyes brimmed with tears, his voice breaking into a desperate plea. "Please, just listen to me." Keanu froze, his chest tightening at the sight of the boy's pain. "I'm listening," he said gently. "Tell me what's going on." The boy began to speak, his words halting and fragmented, but each carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. Ethan described a mysterious figure who had paid the vendor earlier that morning. Hiding in a shadowed corner, his stomach aching with hunger, Ethan had watched the strange exchange unfold. A man cloaked in black had leaned in close, whispering something to the vendor before slipping a wad of cash into his hand. "That I didn't know what to do," Ethan said, wiping his nose with a dirty sleeve. "But when I saw you, I thought, maybe you'd believe me." Keanu's mind raced. Was this just the wild imagination of a frightened child? Or was there something more to his story? Trusting the instinct that had always guided him to help others, even in the face of danger, he made a decision. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. Ethan hesitated, his small, dirt-streaked hand hovering uncertainly before finally clasping Keanu's. They walked together to a small diner nearby, where Keanu hoped to get to the bottom of the boy's strange warning. But the story didn't end there. In the diner's warm glow, With steam rising from a cup of hot chocolate in front of him, Ethan began to talk. He spoke about a life marked by loss, loneliness, and the cruel indifference of the streets. He told Keanu about his mother, who had disappeared years ago, and the men who would sometimes whisper strange things about her, thinking he couldn't hear. Just as Keanu started to piece together an extraordinary connection between Ethan's story and fragments of his own past, the diner door suddenly swung open with a chime. A man in a black coat stepped inside, his piercing gaze sweeping the room. Ethan froze, his small hand clamping tightly onto Keanu's arm. His grip so tight it left red marks on Keanu's skin. "That's him," the boy whispered, his voice trembling. "The man I saw talking to the vendor." Keanu turned, his jaw tightening as his eyes locked with the stranger's cold stare. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a hot dog anymore. Things had become far more complicated, and it was clear Ethan was in serious danger. Keanu's instincts kicked into overdrive as the man in black fixed his gaze on him. The air in the diner grew thick, heavy, and oppressive, pressing down on his chest like a weight. Ethan clung to Keanu like a lifeline, his tiny fingers trembling as though letting go might pull him into the darkness. The stranger stood motionless at the door, his lips curling into a faint, chilling smile. That smile was cold and unnerving, sending a shiver down Keanu's spine. "Ethan," Keanu said quietly, his eyes never leaving the man. "Stay close to me. You're safe. Promise." The boy didn't reply, but his grip tightened, his small frame half hidden behind Keanu's back. Keanu glanced around the diner, his eyes sweeping over the worried faces of the patrons. Everyone sensed something was wrong, but no one dared to speak. The man in the black coat finally began to move, the sound of his shoes striking the tiled floor echoing through the tense atmosphere, each step falling like the hammer of a judge. He walked slowly, deliberately, as if relishing the suspense. Oh, he drawled, his voice smooth and low. "Now this is an interesting twist. Never thought I'd run into you here, Reeves." Keanu's heart sank. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. The man knew who he was, but how and why? "Stay away from the boy," Keanu said, his voice calm but sharp, carrying no hint of compromise. The man chuckled, a hollow, chilling sound that made Ethan shudder. "Oh, I'm not here for the boy," he said, his eyes flicking briefly to Ethan before settling back on Keanu. "He's just collateral. But you're different. You have something I need." Keanu's jaw clenched. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," the man said, his lips curling into a wider grin. "Don't play coy. You know the power you have, the influence, the connections. I just need a little assistance. And if you're smart, you'll agree." Keanu's mind churned, a storm of anger and confusion. What did the man want? And what did this have to do with Ethan? He glanced down at the boy, whose eyes brimmed with tears, his face etched with fear. Whatever was happening, Keanu knew one thing for sure. He had to protect Ethan at all costs. "I don't owe you anything," Keanu said firmly, his voice steady even as emotions surged within him. "And you're not getting anywhere near the boy." The man's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation in his cold gaze. "What a shame," he said, stepping closer. "I thought we could handle this the easy way." In a flash, his hand darted into his coat. Keanu's heart stopped, but before he could react, the diner door burst open again. Two uniformed police officers stormed in, guns drawn, their authoritative presence filling the room. "Hands up where we can see them," one of them barked, his voice sharp and commanding. The man in the black coat froze, his face darkening as he slowly raised his hands. Keanu exhaled deeply, only then realizing he had been holding his breath the entire time. He pulled Ethan close, the instinct to protect the boy surging within him like a tidal wave. The officers quickly restrained the man, cuffing his hands behind his back and leading him out of the diner. As they passed, one of the officers paused and turned to Keanu. "We've been hunting this guy for weeks," he said, his tone tinged with admiration. "Looks like you just helped us take down a dangerous criminal." Keanu nodded, still trying to process everything that had just unfolded. "Glad I could help," he replied, his voice low and steady. But when he looked down at Ethan, he realized it wasn't over. The boy was still trembling, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. "You're safe now," Keanu said gently, kneeling to meet Ethan's gaze. "I promise you, no one can hurt you anymore." But Ethan didn't look reassured. His voice barely above a whisper, he said, "They'll come back. They always come back." Keanu's chest tightened. Those words carried a weight far greater than he could have imagined. This wasn't just about one man in a diner. It was something much larger, a shadow that had haunted Ethan for most of his life. This boy had endured more than anyone should, and deep down, Keanu knew he couldn't walk away. Ethan needed more than a moment of safety. He needed someone who believed in him, someone who would fight for him, and show him he wasn't alone. "Not this time." "No," Keanu said firmly, his voice low but resolute. "They won't come back. Not as long as I'm here." For the first time, Ethan's expression softened. A glimmer of hope flickered through the fear in his eyes. And in that moment, Keanu silently vowed to do whatever it took to protect this boy, to give him the life he deserved, no matter the cost. As they left the diner and stepped into the freezing night, a question began to echo in Keanu's mind. A question he couldn't ignore. Who exactly was Ethan? And what secrets was this boy hiding? The deeper into the night they went, weaving through the winding streets of New York, the cold wind stung their skin. But the small, trembling hand in Keanu's own reminded him of the urgency of the situation. Keanu's mind swirled with thoughts of what they might face next. But one thing was certain. This boy's life had been filled with pain and danger, and Keanu wouldn't let him slip into oblivion. They stopped in front of Emily Brooks' brownstone, its windows glowing warmly against the icy winter night. Keanu knocked softly on the door, and within seconds, it swung open. Emily appeared, dressed in a simple sweater and jeans, her face lighting up with surprise and concern as her eyes fell on the boy hiding behind Keanu. "Come in," she said quickly, stepping aside. "You both look frozen." Keanu guided Ethan inside, where the warmth enveloped them like a protective blanket. Emily knelt to Ethan's level, her gentle eyes searching his face. "Hi there," she said softly. "I'm Emily. You must be Ethan, right?" The boy nodded shyly, staying close to Keanu. Emily offered a small smile. "I just made some hot chocolate. Would you like a cup?" Ethan hesitated, glancing up at Keanu as if seeking reassurance. When Keanu nodded, Ethan murmured, "Yes, thank you." As Emily disappeared into the kitchen, Keanu helped Ethan out of his coat and guided him to the sofa. The boy looked so small, so fragile, yet there was a quiet resilience in his eyes that made Keanu's heart ache. "Do you trust her?" Ethan asked suddenly, his voice barely audible. "With my life," Keanu replied without hesitation. "Emily is one of the kindest people I know." The answer seemed to ease Ethan's tension slightly, but the haunted look in his eyes remained. A moment later, Emily returned, carrying 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate. She handed one to Ethan, who cupped it in both hands and said softly, "Thank you." Emily sat down beside Keanu, her expression somber as her gaze shifted between him and the boy. Her face grew serious, her eyes locking onto Keanu's. "All right," she said firmly. "Tell me everything. Don't leave anything out." Keanu began recounting the events of the night, the poisoned hot dog, the man in the diner, doing his best to explain Ethan's story clearly. He glanced at the boy occasionally to ensure he was comfortable with what was being shared. When Keanu finished, Emily leaned back in her chair, her brows furrowed in deep thought. "This isn't a coincidence," she finally said. "Whoever these people are, they're clearly after something, and they think Ethan has what they need." "But I don't have anything," Ethan interjected, his voice trembling. Emily placed a gentle hand on the boy's knee, her gaze soft and reassuring. "I believe you," she said, "but that doesn't mean they'll stop. We need to figure out why they think you're important." Keanu nodded, his expression resolute. "It has to be connected to your parents," he said. "Something they were involved in or something they left behind. We need to dig deeper." Ethan clutched the mug in his hands, his voice breaking as he said, "I just want them to leave me alone. I didn't ask for this. I don't want it." Keanu's chest tightened at the boy's words. "I know, kid," he said softly, "and I promise I'll keep you safe. But we can't ignore this. We have to face it. Together." Ethan looked up at him, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, his voice a faint whisper. "You don't even know who I am." Keanu's throat tightened. He thought about his own childhood, the losses he had endured, the moments when he had wished someone would show up and save him. "Because I know what it feels like to be alone," he said quietly, "and no one should have to go through that, especially not when I can do something about it." The room fell silent, Keanu's words hanging in the air like a heavy blanket. Emily reached out and placed a hand on Keanu's arm, her gaze filled with understanding. "You have such a kind heart," she said softly. Keanu gave her a small, grateful smile before turning back to Ethan. "We're gonna figure this out," he said firmly, "no matter what it takes." But as the night deepened and the house grew quiet, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Standing by the window, he peered down at the dimly lit street below. Every passing car, every subtle movement in the shadows, set his nerves on edge. Suddenly, Keanu saw it. A shadowy figure standing silently across the street, faintly visible under the dim light. His breath caught in his chest, and his hand instinctively reached for the phone in his pocket. But when he looked again, the figure was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Keanu's heart pounded as he closed the curtains and turned back to the boy sleeping on the sofa. Whatever was coming, he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't let Ethan face it alone. Keanu stood by the window, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the streetlight outside. His sharp gaze swept across the empty street, every nerve on high alert. The shadowy figure he'd seen moments ago had vanished into the night, but the uneasy feeling in his chest remained. Turning back, he looked at Ethan, curled up on the sofa under a thick blanket. The boy's small face appeared weary but peaceful in sleep. Nearby, Emily sat quietly, her worried eyes following Keanu. "What's on your mind?" she asked softly, careful not to wake the boy. Keanu sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "That we're not safe here. Whoever they are, they won't stop until they get to him." Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Then we need to take this to people who can help. This is bigger than us, Keanu. If they're part of some organization, we need to involve the authorities." Keanu hesitated. His trust in law enforcement was complicated. He had seen too many instances where the system failed the people who needed it most. But Emily was right. This wasn't just about protecting Ethan anymore. They needed answers, and they couldn't do it alone. Just then, Ethan stirred, his sleepy eyes blinking open as he looked toward Keanu. "What's going on?" he murmured, rubbing his eyes. Keanu sat down beside him, his voice warm and steady. "We're figuring out what to do next, kid. But I need you to be strong, okay? We're going to get through this." Ethan nodded, though fear still lingered in his eyes. "They're going to find us, aren't they?" he whispered. Keanu placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder, his gaze steady and calm. "Not if I can stop it." Suddenly, a knock on the door shattered the silence in the room. Everyone froze. Emily's eyes widened, and Ethan's breath hitched as he clung tightly to Keanu's hand. "Stay here," Keanu said quietly, gesturing for Emily to keep Ethan close. He moved toward the door cautiously, each step deliberate. Looking through the peephole, a wave of relief washed over him when he recognized the familiar face on the other side. "It's okay," Keanu called back, unlocking the door. "This is someone I trust." He opened the door to reveal Marcus Hayes, his longtime friend and confidant. Marcus entered swiftly, his presence both comforting and commanding. "Keanu," Marcus said, his deep voice serious. "Emily filled me in. I got here as soon as I could." Keanu nodded, closing the door behind him. "Thanks for coming. I didn't know who else to call." Marcus's eyes scanned the room until they landed on Ethan, who was watching him cautiously from the sofa. Marcus softened his tone as he looked at the boy. "So, this must be the kid," he said gently. "Hey there, I'm Marcus. Ethan nodded hesitantly but stayed quiet, clutching the blanket. In his hands like it was a lifeline. Marcus turned back to Keanu, his expression growing serious again. We need to leave. Now, on my way here I made some calls. This isn't just some isolated incident. The people after this boy are connected to a much larger network, serious criminal operations. Keanu's jaw tightened, his voice tinged with worry. What do they want with him? Marcus hesitated, a troubled look crossing his face. I don't have the full picture yet, but from what I've learned, they believe Ethan's parents had access to information, something incredibly valuable. And now they think Ethan knows about it too. Emily stepped forward, her gaze firm. So what's the plan? Marcus looked at the group, his voice calm but resolute. I have a safe house in the suburbs. It's off the grid, completely discreet. We can lay low there while figuring out our next move. Keanu nodded. All right, let's go. Quickly. They moved swiftly, taking only the essentials. Ethan stayed close to Keanu, his small hand clutching tightly to his sleeve as they stepped out into the freezing night. Marcus led the way, guiding them toward an unmarked SUV parked a block away. Moments later, they were quietly leaving the city behind, the glow of urban lights fading into the distance. The safe house was nestled deep in the woods, a small, cozy cabin surrounded by towering trees. The isolation and quiet of the place felt like a world apart from the chaos they'd left behind. Ethan seemed to relax slightly as everyone settled in, but the tension in the air was palpable. That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep in a small bedroom of the cabin, Keanu, Marcus, and Emily gathered by the fireplace to discuss their next steps. Emily's face was lined with worry, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea. We need to figure out what they're looking for, Marcus said, breaking the silence. If we can uncover what Ethan's parents were involved in, we might have a chance to stop them. Keanu nodded, his gaze distant. And if we can't? Marcus looked him straight in the eye, his voice firm. Then we have to make sure they never get to the boy. Suddenly, a faint noise broke through the stillness outside, shattering the calm of the cabin. Keanu shot to his feet, his body tense. Did you hear that? Marcus grabbed a flashlight from a nearby table, motioning for Keanu to follow. They stepped outside, the cold night air biting at their skin. The forest was eerily silent, save for the crunching of snow beneath their boots. The beam of Marcus's flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating patches of the dense woodland. Out of the corner of his eye, Keanu caught a flicker of movement among the trees. His pulse quickened as he turned to Marcus. We're not alone. Before Marcus could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows, its face concealed behind a mask. Keanu took a step forward, his hands clenched into fists, his voice sharp and commanding. Stand back. The masked figure remained motionless, its silent presence speaking volumes. This wasn't over, not even close. As Keanu stood there, ready to fight to protect Ethan, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would give everything for this boy. Ethan wasn't just a child in danger anymore. He had become family. The cabin fell into a tense silence, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the faint whistle of the wind. Keanu and Marcus stood shoulder to shoulder, facing the masked figure at the edge of the forest. From the doorway, Emily peeked out, her face pale with worry. Inside, Ethan remained unaware of the immediate threat closing in. Keanu's instincts sharpened as he took another step forward, his voice steady but commanding. What do you want? The figure didn't move at first, but then slowly raised a hand, pointing directly at the cabin. The boy, came the distorted, gravelly voice from behind the mask. Give him to us and no one gets hurt. Keanu's blood boiled. Not a chance, he replied, his voice hard as steel. Marcus stepped closer, the flashlight in his hand beaming straight at the intruder. You're outnumbered, Marcus said coldly. Walk away while you still can. For a moment, the figure didn't respond. But then, as if in defiance, more shadows began to materialize from the trees. 2, then 3 more masked figures emerged, gradually encircling the cabin. Keanu's heart pounded, but he stood his ground. Inside the cabin, Ethan peeked nervously out the window. His small body trembled as he saw the masked figures closing in. Fear flooded his face as he cried out, "Keanu!" Hearing Ethan's call, Keanu turned to Marcus and said firmly, "Get them inside and lock the door. I'll hold them off." "You can't face them alone," Marcus protested. But the determined look in Keanu's eyes silenced him. As the masked figures advanced, Keanu stepped forward, his posture tall and unwavering. He knew he might not walk away from this fight unscathed. But he also knew one thing for certain: Ethan would not be harmed, not as long as he was still standing. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the tension reverberating through the stillness like an unspoken warning. Keanu clenched his fists tightly, ready to fight for the boy he now saw as family. The battle was only beginning, but his resolve was unshakable. This story serves as a powerful reminder that courage and compassion can change lives, not only for others but for ourselves as well. Have you ever stood up to protect someone, even knowing it might put you at risk? Share your story in the comments. Your voice could inspire thousands of others. If you found this story meaningful, share it with your friends and family to spread the message of kindness and resilience in the face of adversity. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next heartwarming and inspirational story. Together, let's make small but meaningful changes to make this world a better place. Wishing you and your family peace and happiness always. Thank you for supporting our channel. Like, share, and subscribe to stay updated with the latest stories. These stories are sourced from various inspirations and do not represent any specific individual or organization. They are shared with the aim of spreading the human values that make life richer and are written with the assistance of AI. If there are any errors, we hope for your understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.